Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Our speaker today is Dr. Ric Finch. Rick has quite a few fascinating images and stories that he would like to share with us. As a result, he asked me not to waste any of his time with a lengthy introduction. So without further ado, thank you for coming. Please enjoy your afternoon with your 2019 NSS luminary, Dr. Ric Finch.
Thank you, Dave, for your kind and brief words. When Dave invited me to make a luminary talk, my reaction was, you got the wrong guy. I am not a professional speleologist. I have no cave science to share with you. I'm not a big-name cave explorer who's done daring deeds at depth. I haven't invented any piece of equipment or technique that everyone is using now. I'm just an old-time spelunker and an unrepentant one at that. So, spelunker, a word that is sadly out of favor with cavers. But during the course of this talk, I hope to demonstrate to you that it's a word with a great heritage, with a lot of uses, and a word we can be proud to use because it was cave explorers that invented the word spelunker. But actually, it has ancient and honorable pedigree that goes back at least as far as the Wycliffe Bible, published in 1382, where it shows up as the double spelunk, or cave. Now, I go back a ways too, but not that far. I grew up in Central Texas in the 1950s. My best friend lived on a ranch with about 20 caves, insignificant one-room caves. There was one that had been a one-room cave, but the roof fell in, leaving a donut of cave around a talus cone. In a burst of imagination, we named it Circle Cave, and we moved some breakdown around, built a fort, and fought the Indians. Another cave on the ranch was Ku Klux Klan Cave, with mysterious tables and altars in it, and about once a year, candle stubs would mysteriously appear throughout the cave. And as kids, we never knew who was meeting there. We were pretty sure it wasn't the Klan. There was a third cave that had a big mound of bat guano in it. And I had the bright idea, why don't we mine this stuff and sell it as fertilizer? So we went in and we dug and we hauled it out on our backs in gunny sacks, packaged it in paper bags at 10 pounds apiece, and hauled them around town on a radio flyer wagon and sold them door to door. In retrospect, I rather suspect that it was just friends of our parents who were our clients. In any case, we were too young to drive, and so we either hiked or rode horses to get to the caves, and horses could be useful for other tasks as well. In one cave, I found a big stalagmite, a beauty, already broken off by some ancient geologic event, at about 4.5 feet tall, maybe 8 inches in diameter, nicely formed, weighed as much as I did, I'm sure. We took a lasso in there, tied it onto that stalagmite, hauled it out, and it looked great in my room throughout my high school days. Cave conservation. I knew both words, but I'd never heard them used in sequence. And that, my friends, is one of many reasons why the NSS is so damn important, to educate young kids before they do something dumb in caves. Unfortunately, I had never heard of the NSS until I had a chance encounter with members of the University of Texas Grotto, spelunkers. And that's what they called themselves, proudly. The UT spelunkers told me about the NSS, and I promptly joined in March of 1961. The UT spelunkers also introduced me to international cave exploration, taking me on my first of many trips to Bustamante in northern Mexico, home to Grutas del Palmito, an awesome, voluminous cavern, extravagantly decorated, and really some big rooms. This one's called the football room for its size. Now, the photo needs a little explanation, I think. I took it with an Argus C3, which is a camera shaped like a brick, the size of a brick, and just as rugged as a brick. It had a bulb setting on the shutter, and so it made a pretty good introductory cave camera. Trouble is, I didn't have a cable release. So I set the camera up on my flimsy, cheap tripod and framed the picture, and had a couple of models sitting out in the room there, and then I opened the shutter and wrapped a rubber band around the camera body to hold the shutter plunger down. And then I walked out across the room, popping some bulbs. You can see they weren't too expertly placed. Climbed up over a big pile of breakdown, got in the backside and lit a red railroad flare and walked back and forth for about 5 minutes. Another questionable Cave Conservation Act. And then I hollered at the guy I'd left by the camera to shut her down. Well, it's not perfect, but considering the equipment in use at the time and the experience of the photographer, it ain't too shabby. Well, in the early mid-60s, I moved to Tennessee. Texas has some great caves, caverns of Sonora, for example, but not like Tennessee. Wow, what caves. And as we all know today, Tennessee is the land of 10,000 caves. And Tennessee has a whole class of caves that Texas doesn't have, saltpeter caves. I have long been fascinated by the tragic history of the South, and so it was thrilling to me to visit caves where amazing saltpeter mining artifacts could be found. Ladders, leaching vats, wooden water pipes, hand tools, catwalks, even a wooden railway in one cave. Relics constructed by Confederate saltpeter miners during the war between the states. Or, as we Southerners are wont to say, the late unpleasantness with the North. I'm sorry to tell you that this magnificent catwalk no longer exists. It was burned to ashes by vandals. Here is a tall ladder used by saltpeter miners to get to an upper passageway, but to get to this part of the cave, you had to come through a very narrow, sinuous passageway that would not permit such a ladder to be brought in. So they built it in sections and lashed them together. A really remarkable feat of engineering. Sadly, this ladder has been damaged by vandals. The last pair of V-shaped saltpeter hoppers left in Big Bone Cave. Stolen and taken to Alabama along with several ladders and water pipes. This was 1965, and I was chairman of the Nashville Grotto, and so I organized a campaign by the Grotto to get the state of Tennessee to purchase and protect Big Bone Cave. I gave some talks to the Tennessee Historical Society, but the main thing was a letter-writing campaign, and letters poured in from NSS spelunkers, speleologists, historians, paleontologists, and archaeologists from all over the U.S. And I'm happy to say that the campaign was successful. The state did purchase the cave, and Big Bone Cave is now protected as part of a state park. It has what is probably the largest collection of Civil War saltpeter relics in the United States. Only maybe Oregon Cave in West Virginia might compete with it. It's a double-edged sword. Access is limited, but the important thing is our historical patrimony is preserved. Well, now, Tennessee also offered me some nice opportunities for spelunking. In the summers, I could work in Cumberland Caverns along with Tank Goring, Roy Davis, and Ed Yarbrough, true NSS luminaries. And as you can see, I had some unusual spelunking opportunities. And by the way, 54 years later, I'm still driving that MGTD. It'd be outside in the parking lot if the weather were better. In spite of the great spelunking in Tennessee, I returned to Texas in 1967 to begin work on my Ph.D. in geology at the University of Texas. Graduate work did not leave me much time for spelunking, but I did manage to get into a few Texas classics, such as the magnificent Devil's Sinkhole, a truly storied pit. But in 1969, something happened that was to prove hugely significant to my spelunking career. I was assigned a dissertation field area in Honduras, Central America. And I quickly saw that Honduras possesses some significant speleological potential. Just outside my dissertation area was the Montaña de Santa Barbara, 3,500 feet of limestone, Cretaceous, thick-bedded, highly soluble limestone, 5,000 feet of relief. The top of the upper portions of the mountain are highly karstified, spectacular potential. Actually, within my dissertation field area is the Swallet, and it has been shown by hydrologic studies to resurge at this big spring, a full 9 kilometers straight line distance away. A huge cave system lurks between these 2 points. Unfortunately, I had no time for spelunking and no one to do it with while working on my Ph.D. Ditto for the 3 years that I worked in Honduras as a mining exploration geologist. Exploring Honduras's speleological potential had to wait until I was established here in Cookeville as a geology prof at Tennessee Tech. So the first speleological expedition on record, and the very first, as far as I know, to Honduras, I led in the summer of 1979 with Buddy Lane and Jim Coffey. Summer 1979. That's the wet season in Central America and limits what you can do. But we visited the downstream entrance or the resurgence of the Subterraneo del Río Atima. I had visited the upstream entrance in earlier years while doing geologic work and knew we could not get in there during the rainy season. Too much water. We found the same condition existed in the downstream entrance. Too much water, too much current, but something to come back to in the dry season. We explored Cueva Masical, a very nice horizontal cave, and also an archaeological site. While I was setting up for this picture, Jim found a beautiful obsidian knife. I got excited, but I didn't want to show it, so I continued setting up for the picture, and he found another one. And we took the picture and looked for an hour and found nothing more. But the cave has been visited by ancient peoples throughout. We explored about a mile of cave, and there were signs of ancient traffic there throughout what we explored. But in spite of that, it was, at that time, a very pristine and beautiful cave. We also checked out the entrance to Cueva La Buena Fé, which is located in a fault zone and just exactly halfway between the Swallet and the big spring that I showed you in earlier slides. And this entrance, I was sure, was the key to entering a long cave system. Note the big log. It was later swallowed by the cave. Well, Jim descended the first drop and confirmed that we had going cave, but this was no place to spend a lot of time during the wet season. And besides, we only had the one rope for this recon. 1979 was only a recon in the wet season, which limits what you can safely do. So in April of 1981, spring break at Tech, Tennessee Tech here in Cookeville, and the peak of the dry season in Honduras, I returned accompanied by Frank Bogle, then a geology major at Tech and one of my students. I also enlisted Peter Dynkin, a friend of mine who worked at the embassy, to join us in mapping Cueva Masical. Embassy personnel can be really, really useful, particularly in instances when local authorities sometimes try to cause a little trouble. But it's a double-edged sword because embassy people have tight schedules, and Pete only had the weekend free. So we set up camp in the entrance and got to mapping as quickly as we could. We mapped like crazy until we had to get some rest, got up the next day and mapped all day until we couldn't do it anymore. We mapped about 2 kilometers, and unfortunately, we were unable to finish this map before Peter had to return to the embassy. So keep this in mind, please. Cueva Masical, partially mapped in 1981. I will return to this again. After Peter returned to the embassy, Frank and I undertook to explore Cueva La Buena Fé, which we suspected might be a little ambitious for just the 2 of us. Now, we had planned to meet up with Steve Knutson, who was in Honduras at the same time, but communication difficulties, and you must remember this is the pre-cell phone age, they were actually sending messages by 1880s telegraph equipment at the time in Honduras. Anyway, it precluded our locating Steve in Honduras and joining forces. And Frank and I decided we'll have a go at it and see what we can do. You saw this 1979 image earlier, and I'm showing it again because I want to emphasize the changes that have taken place in a mere couple of years. Drastically changed entrance, and the log has been swallowed by the cave. I've never seen any other cave that is changing so fast. And part of the explanation is the large volume of water that goes down the cave in the wet season, but also the nature of the rock there. It's a fault breccia and easily eroded. So here's a very young Frank Bogle at the bottom of the first drop. And by the way, if you don't know Frank, you should. Frank is this year's convention co-chairman. Stand up, Frank. And he's worked his butt off on your behalf. Drop 2 was short, but water came in there, even in the dry season, and the rest of the drops were quite wet. When we got to the 5th drop, it was obviously bigger and deeper than the first 4. We tied on our last rope, put a knot at the end. We couldn't tell from the weight of the rope whether it was on the bottom or not. So we put a knot on the end, and I made ready to do a changeover if necessary. Well, I can tell you I was hoping it wouldn't be necessary because I'd never done one, and this was a hell of a place to learn. Not a good time, really. And I started down, and I soon saw that knot hanging in the blackness, wig-wagging back and forth, and I was puckered. And in fact, I was so puckered that if I could have gotten the rope between my butt cheeks, it would have made a perfect safety. Maybe even in a cinder. So I carefully and slowly changed into climbing gear. I knew in theory how to do it. And I didn't want to make any mistakes. If I'd made a mistake, I wouldn't be here talking to you today. Frank got a little worried because I was taking so long. He's hollering down to me. I'm hollering back to him. Neither of us can understand the other because of the waterfall. And we were both very relieved when I got back to the top of drop 5. And that was it for the first effort at plumbing Cueva La Buena Fé. I returned to Cueva La Buena Fé in 1982 with Frank again, plus Elwin and Debbie Hanna, a couple of stout Tennessee spelunkers. And we explored and mapped the cave to minus 160 meters, that's minus 525 feet, to a terminal sump. Oh, I was crushed. We got down at the bottom of the 5th pit, and the stream gradient sort of leveled out a bit, and I thought, damn it, we are into the big horizontal cave now. It's going to go for kilometers. We hit a sump. Found a way up and over and around that sump, and again, we are in big cave now. It's going to go for kilometers, and we hit another sump. I don't think anyone else has ever been back there. I'm sure of it. But I'll say to you this, somebody ought to go back. At the rate that entrance is evolving, at the rate the whole cave is changing, at the amount of water that goes down it, and during Hurricane Mitch in '98, the valley was really flooded. There's no telling what you'd find if you went down there now. Those sumps may be blown open, and there's a lot of cave waiting to be discovered there. In 1984, I organized and led the first speleological expedition to the Montañas de Colón in the far easternmost part of Honduras. That's the wild and woolly part of Honduras, almost zero roads out there. The Montañas de Colón is a belt of folded and thrust-faulted mountains, again made of limestone up to 3,500 feet thick, with extensive karst development. I got down in a sinkhole in a helicopter I was using on some geologic work one time. We flew around inside this sinkhole looking for cave entrances. Well, the term expedition is much overused, but I think this particular venture qualified. First, we had to get ourselves and our gear to Honduras. Then we chartered a twin-engine Azteca to ferry us in 2 loads out to the remote Mesquite area of eastern Honduras. Then we had to find and rent a 41-foot-long dugout and attach the 5-horsepower motor we had brought with us and putt up the broad Patuca River for a day and a half just to get to the area where we thought we'd find some caves. Who's we? Front to back, you have Debbie Hanna, Trent Carr, Ed Yarbrough, Larry Cohen, again of the U.S. Embassy, and Elwin Hanna. And I'm standing up front to take the picture. You need someone standing up front with a long pole. This is the bowman. and I was bowman at this time. That's to ward off floating snags and to steer the pipante around shallow rocks and that sort of thing. Now I'm wearing my white hard hat. That's because I'm bald and don't want the top of my head sunburned. It happened to make me recognizable, but I didn't expect anyone to recognize me, and imagine my shock when I heard my name, Ricardo, come floating across the river. There was a man and two boys in a small pipante at the far bank, laboriously poling their way up the river. And we motored over to see who this was calling out my name, and it was Adolfo. Adolfo, who had worked for me when I was doing some work for Amico in this area some months earlier, and Adolfo was the man we wanted to find, an excellent bushman, and I wanted to hire him to work for us on this spelunking trip. Well, what was he doing out of pocket here so far downriver? I asked him, and he said, well, he had some chickens, and at nighttime a varmint was getting in with his chickens, and he was getting up in the middle of the night with his flashlight and his .22 trying to shoot the varmint, and he ran all his flashlight batteries down. So Adolfo is returning from a shopping trip to the nearest convenience store, 1 full day's float downriver, a 2-day pole back upstream to get home. Yes, folks, this is a remote, undeveloped area. He was glad to see us as much as I to see him, because we tied him onto the back of our boat and towed him home, saved him a lot of work. And Adolfo went to work for us, and that was great. He chopped trails, guided, hunted. We set up camp beside the Rio Sutawala, a karst stream fed by springs, big resurgences from the caves we sought. We found several large resurgences, a few small caves, but nothing significant. We met some jungle denizens, like this beautiful big boa. Adolfo brought some in for us to eat, and it was a very interesting jungle experience. Unfortunately, no big caves. We'll get back to that theme later, too. Not finding any significant caves in the time we had allotted, and that was partly dependent on Larry Cohen. As I say, embassy people work on a tight schedule, and after a week there, we had to return to civilization. We transferred operations to western Honduras, where I had a good lead, and we explored and mapped Cueva Guatemalía, 11 drops, down to minus 330 meters in just 242 meters horizontal. That's 1,082 feet deep in 794 feet horizontal. And I think anytime you find a cave that's deeper than it is long, that's pretty good. And most certainly anytime you find a cave that's over 1,000 feet deep, that's real good. Cueva Guatemalía is one of 4 caves in Honduras over 1,000 feet deep, which is pretty remarkable for a country no bigger than Tennessee. And, by the way, I think I know where another one could be. And if anybody wants a lead, you can contact me. I'll be glad to give you a lead. In 1987, I didn't lead any expedition. I joined one led by Steve Knutson, an international group of spelunkers from the U.S., Canada, and England. And this was Steve's 4th attempt to go all the way through the Subterraneo del Río Atima. I showed you a picture earlier of the resurgence in the wet season. And this 4th attempt was successful, and I had the good fortune to be on board. You enter the gaping upstream entrance on the left-hand side, and you try to stay out of the water, so you follow ledges as far as you can until they peter out, and then you're forced to rappel down, and from then on, you're at or near stream level, still trying to stay out of the current as much as possible, but often there's no choice but to get in and go with the flow. We used a lot of canal line for safety in deep or swift water. But as you approach the downstream entrance, the gradient flattens and things get a little calmer until you get to the resurgent entrance itself, where there is a nice little waterfall. So, great through trip. Subterraneo del Río Atima, mapped out at 2,450 meters long and 190 meters deep. It's the 4th longest cave known in Honduras. We used over 1 kilometer of rope on 54 different riggings and a lot of canal line. By now, I think you've all caught on that my speleological focus has been on Honduras. But that doesn't mean I would ignore other good opportunities. By 1991, Lechuguilla had become famous, and the Chamber of Commerce types in Carlsbad were asking, why don't we commercialize this big new cave and double our tourist income? Well, the National Park Service was not too happy about this idea, and certainly the cave explorers working in Lechuguilla weren't. So the Park Service hired Roy Davis of Cumberland Caverns and Jack Hershon of Marble Cave Park to come out and check out the commercial possibilities of Lechuguilla. And for reasons I'll never really know, maybe just to help pay for the rental car, Roy invited me to go, and I got to visit Lechuguilla, and I'll always be grateful to him. Thank you, Roy. Roy's and Jack's report to the relief of the National Park Service and all who truly cared about Lech convinced the Carlsbad City boosters that there was no feasible way to commercialize Lechuguilla. And I had the great privilege and thrill to visit the Chandelier Ballroom, one of the true highlights of my spelunking career. In 2001, I returned to the Montañas de Colón with a group of internationally known spelunkers as a member of an expedition led by Pete Shifflett. Now, we had some pretty well-known people on that trip. Matt Oliphant, Nancy Pistole, Herb Lager, Taco Van Aperen, Gene Creature, Vivian Lofton, plus yours truly. And you might wonder how I got to associate with such a group, but I did have an advantage. I knew the way. I could guide them there. The trouble is, our results were the same as in 1984. We went high into the mountains. We explored big sinks, and we couldn't find any big caves. And we also learned that a large group of Italians had been in there in 1995, spent 3 weeks there, mapped about 2 kilometers of cave, but it was all little bitty bits and pieces, nothing significant. So the question remains, where are the big caves that have to be there? We exited the area. We didn't have our own rented pipante, so we exited the area on a balsa raft that a Tawaka Indian helped us build. Well, he built it. We just cut the balsa. And this was on May the 5th of 2001. It happened to be my 58th birthday, and I don't think I've ever spent a more unusual birthday activity than rafting down the Patuca River. Folks, if the word spelunker was good enough for Bill Cuddington and Bill Halliday, it ought to be good enough for any caver. In 2003, I received a phone call from Mary Gratch of the Cincinnati Grotto. Could I arrange a spelunking trip to Guatemala for a group from Cincinnati? I almost said cavers, goodness. I had retired from teaching geology, and my wife, Janie, and I were running a small touring company, taking people on adventure tours in Latin America, and Guatemala happened to be our specialty, so the answer to Mary's question was an emphatic yes. And this led to a great partnership with Mary and her husband, Pete Miller. Since 2003, we have been on many international trips together, including 4 to Guatemala. I've visited a lot of great caves in Guatemala, but I'm only going to trouble you with one of them, Chichibu, the largest cave system in Central America. Most of it lies under Belize, but the downstream entrance, known as the Xibalba entrance, lies inside Guatemala. We went in the Chichibu. Oh, it's a big one. You see the spelunker in the red circle there? It's a big entrance, yeah. We went into Chichibu in Guatemala, and we came out in Belize. No passports or custom checks, thank you very much. We turned around and went back through the cave, easier than overland. From the entrance, looking into the cave, here's what you see. Massive formations, a few spelunkers, and 1,000-year-old Mayan walls. There are walls, platforms, burials, altars, pottery shards. This is quite a significant archaeological site. And it's big. Even small passages in Chichibu are big. The altar on the lower right there is probably untouched for 1,000 years. It still contains offerings and a stalagmite that appears to be painted in cinnabar. It's awesome. And the cave is beautifully decorated with colorful giants, and it is absolutely huge. In addition to the guy popping the flash, you might note two other spelunkers in the cave stream, lower right center. Well, okay, 4 years we had trips to Guatemala. Can't ignore Honduras, though. That's my home away from home. And we had trips to Honduras in these years as well with Pete and Mary and others. We returned to Cueva Masical in 2006. Remember, I started mapping that cave in 1981. 25 years later, we come back and finish it up. 2,377 meters over 25 years. That's 95 meters a year. And that's my entry for the International Slow Cave Mapping Contest, and frankly, I think it's a winner. I'm sorry to see that Masical is no longer pristine, but we were intrigued to find that locals were visiting the cave in much the same manner as their Mayan ancestors, using pitch pine torches for cave lights. So we found on the floor of the cave an early Maya version, but much later, actually, present-day lighting system there of pitch pine torches. We also visited in 2006 Cueva Siete Quebradas. Some of us explored a little bit of it, but not too much, because one member of our team, Pete Miller, was too broad-shouldered to fit through the tiny entrance. We had to come back with some tools in 2008 to enlarge it a little bit and start the mapping. It took us several trips to finally finish mapping it. I mapped in at 3,258 meters, a little over 2 miles, the second longest in Honduras. And by now you may have also figured out that Honduras is not noted for long cave systems. It's too broken up by hundreds of faults. Now, on the 2008 trip, Gerald and Avis Money were along with us. And I have to tell you about Avis if you didn't know Avis. Oh, what a trooper. We were coming out of the cave, and a rock turned under her foot. She fell. She was injured. It hurt. We didn't know how much she was injured until a couple of days later when we got her to a doctor and said x-rays, and she had fractured her leg in 2 places. But she self-rescued. She got herself out of the cave. She crossed the Rio Haitiki twice. She hiked 3 kilometers back to the waiting cars. When we learned that she'd actually fractured her leg, I thought that Gerald and Avis would fly back home, but Avis was not having any of that. You guys keep on doing what you're doing. I'll stay in the motel and read magazines. We celebrated Avis's 80th birthday in Juticalpa, Honduras. What a trooper. Another thing about Siete Quebradas, it has a thermal stream in it, and I wanted to know what was the temperature of that stream. And it's also a very pristine cave, and we knew that our attentions to the cave would also clue some locals in that there was something there. And so I wanted to put a cave register in the cave, and with a very strong conservation message written in Spanish and laminated in plastic. I had, on the flight down, I had the thermometer wrapped in underwear and stuffed in the cave register made of PVC pipe where it would be safe. But it showed up on the x-ray, luggage x-ray, as a pipe bomb. That mercury thermometer really lit it up, and there was some excitement. I thought I would miss my plane, but after they saw what it really was, they hustled me through the gate and got me to it. But that's something to think about. If you're going on an international trip and you want to take a cave register with you, take one that doesn't look like a pipe bomb. In 2009, I led another group to Honduras, this time to Montaña Rompeculo. Now that's a heck of a name. There's only one way to translate it: Break-Ass Mountain. Our goal was to bottom Pozo del Portillo, a deep cave partially explored by a group of Catalan cavers, spelunkers, in the late 1990s. We knew from their work that it was deep. And because it was deep, we came with a lot of luggage. You can see our baggage train there. You can also see what the local chief of police did for us. He sent out an armed guard, which we didn't want. He said it was for our security, but more likely it was to project his own power over the locals. Fortunately, when they found out where we were hiking to, they said, "No thanks, you all go ahead, we'll stay here." So we hiked up to the mountain, set up our camp, and we provided our own homeland security. That's Mary Gratch on the right there, and our local man, Dagoberto, who's just wonderful, could do anything you need done, except he doesn't actually explore caves. Pozo del Portillo is a highly unusual cave. It's developed in conglomerate. Now, it is a conglomerate sedimentologically, but the pebbles, cobbles, and boulders that make up the clasts are made of limestone, and they constitute some 70% of the rock. So chemically, the rock is a limestone. Sedimentologically, a conglomerate, chemically a limestone, and if it's chemically a limestone, you can get caves in it. And that's what you have there. It was explored by Catalan cavers in 1997 down to minus 384 meters, 1,260 feet, the deepest known cave in the world in conglomerate. They didn't quite bottom it. We hope to do that. Unfortunately, we did not achieve that particular goal of bottoming Pozo, but we did pretty well prove where the bottom is with the dye trace and locating the resurgence. Unfortunately, we used a little bit too much dye, what Jim Quinlan used to refer to as a glorious positive. Well, it kind of excited some of the local folks. This was one of their drinking water supplies, and we had an excited bunch up at camp and a powwow that required quite a bit of talking before they agreed to let us stay. We mapped the Resurgence Cave, and just think of spelunking amidst walls of multicolored conglomerate. It's like being inside an exotic giant sculpture. Just absolutely fabulous. In 2010, in addition to Central America, we visited Mina Naica in northern Mexico. Why visit a mine? Well, this mine has intersected some really extraordinary caves. Some of you probably already know this. Around 1910, astonished Mexican miners broke into a cave lined with thousands upon thousands of gypsum crystals, most of them around a foot long, but some up to 2 meters long. And you can see some of the bigger ones in a reconstruction of a small portion of Cueva de los Espadas, or Cave of the Swords, in the Museum of Natural History in the Smithsonian in Washington. They have a reconstruction of a part of the cave. In 1977, I visited Mina Naica with a group of geology majors from Tennessee Tech. And on this trip, I met a young Mexican geologist who by 2010 had become the mine manager. And this proved to be a good piece of luck for us. In April of 2000, a couple of miners broke into another cave deeper than the early discovered caves, deeper in a hotter portion of the mine. They could not enjoy their find. They saw these gigantic crystals, mind-blowing crystals, but they could not enjoy their find because the temperature and the humidity could be fatal. In 10 to 20 minutes, you would be literally cooked. Well, the mine is ventilated, of course. And so once the cave had been opened and connected to the mine, the temperature began to fall, and it was dropping at a rate of about 1 degree a year. By the time we got there in 2010, it was down to a mere 112 degrees Fahrenheit. Anyway, Cueva de los Cristales, Cave of the Crystals, contains giant crystals of selenite, a form of gypsum, and they're thought to be the largest gypsum crystals in the world. The Italian speleologist who explored, mapped, sampled, studied the cave when it was hotter than when we got there had to use special cooling suits to be able to survive the environment. We didn't. We could go in dressed fairly ordinarily. Nonetheless, Janie, on the right in this shot, as if you didn't tell, Janie and I bought blocks of dry ice at a pharmacy in Chihuahua City and put them into our clothing to help with the heat. Our group consisted of 4 couples, and we were allowed to enter the cave 2 at a time for 10 minutes, then come out and cool down in an antechamber that was only 98 degrees. Each couple got 3 visits, and we had then a total of 30 minutes, which we stretched a bit in an unbelievable crystal paradise. Really thrilling. 2009, caves in conglomerate. 2010, caves with giant crystals. Both pretty weird, both pretty unusual. and a project was born. We set out to visit an example of each of the world's most unusual caves. Jokingly, I call it the Weird Caves of the World project. In 2011, we headed south again, this time to Venezuela. Another true expedition, international flight, in-country flight, day and a half of driving, 3-day hike to reach and ascend Mount Roraima, the flat-topped plateau you see there. Roraima was the inspiration for Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's novella, The Lost World. And the plants and animals and weird erosional landscapes on the top of Roraima are so otherworldly that it's easy to believe that if you don't watch where you're going around the corner, you might come face to face with a living dinosaur. The cliffs of quartzite are 500 meters high, tall, and there's only one way up. See if I can make this thing work. Behind Janie in the picture there is a sloping ledge called the ramp. That's the only way up. Now, not many spelunkers go there, but Roraima has been a popular destination for trekkers, and the local Pemon Indians serve as guides, porters, cooks, and whatever you need. They have designated campsites in rock shelters that they call hoteles. We stayed at the Hotel Guacharo. Guacharo is the name of the oil bird, which lives in caves. It spends the daytime hours back in total darkness in the caves, comes out at night, flies around eating fruit. It's an important disseminator of fruit tree seeds. And the most interesting thing is that they navigate like bats by echolocation. And Hotel Guacharo was actually the entrance to Cueva Guatemalía, which was a portion of the Sistema Roraima. At the time we were there in 2011, the longest known cave developed in quartzite, 16.4 kilometers. I think they have a longer one now. Because quartzite is, compared to limestone, essentially insoluble, explaining the existence of these extensive caves isn't really easy. NSS speleologist Hazel Barton has published evidence that biological activity may result in an intergranular alkaline microenvironment that causes the quartzite to disaggregate. In addition to guacharos, the caves are home to aquatic crickets that crawl around on the bottoms of pools. As far as I know, they don't have gills and must come up to breathe, but you could see them crawling around on the bottom of pools, not like any cricket here in North America. Because there's no calcium carbonate in the rock, the speleothems are made of opal. And Cato Hollow, a well-known North Carolina spelunker, and two of his sons were on this trip. It was actually set up for them. And Cato is a member of the Explorers Club of America, so this trip was an Explorers Club flag trip. In 2012, we went back to just normal limestone caves. Well, no, not normal. The caves of the Gunung Mulu National Park are well out of the ordinary for their stupendous dimensions. This is Deer Cave. It runs through the mountain. Big entrance on one side, a not quite as big entrance on the other side. Minimum dimensions, 300 feet by 300 feet. You could fly an ultralight through it. Getting out the second entrance might be a little tricky, but I think it could be done. We were actually informed that the ceiling height in this area of this picture was 200 meters. I don't know if that's true or not. I just know it's big. Clearwater Cave System in the park is the longest cave with 227 kilometers mapped thus far, the 8th longest cave in the world, and thought by some to be the largest cave in the world by total volume. We had a marvelous 8-hour through trip here led by competent park guides. Many of the caves in the Gunung Mulu Park are very well decorated, and some of them feature these strange formations known as shower heads. For obvious reasons, they're known as shower heads. I have no idea how they form. In 2013, it was back to Latin America, this time to explore caves excavated in rock salt. Rock salt is highly soluble, dissolves rapidly if you have water. Not only forms caves, but it's got a lot of microcarn forms, just the same forms as you see in limestone, but typically they're more exaggerated. And Lord help you if you stumble and fall face first into these salt spires. It doesn't rain very often in the Atacama, but when it does, caves can form, and the typical salt caves are multi-entrance, meandering stream caves and dry most of the time. They also have speleothems. Looks like gypsum crystals, but nope, those are salt flowers. Look like gypsum flowers, I meant to say. Halite is the main rock salt mineral. It grows in cubic crystals. Now, I don't know what to call the formations in the lower right there, helictites or what, but you can see the cubic shapes, cube on cube on cube. You know it's halite. The salt caves have lots of surprises, some good, some not so good. Thomas Hawkins, another one of our stalwarts, found a unopened bottle of Sauvignon Blanc in one cave. Who left it there and for whom was a mystery, not for us, but we sure enjoyed it. On the other hand, a not yet cleared minefield right next to the cave area, left over from some border dispute, had the potential to yield a really ugly surprise. In 2014, we stayed in the U.S., but still went overseas, to Hawaii, to explore lava tubes. In Hawaii, we were hosted by Ann and Peter Bosted, who shared their immense knowledge of the local caves and also got us to help in some of their mapping projects. I had been in lava tubes before, and I didn't expect much. Gray, black, rusty brown. Oh, was I in for a surprise. Lava tubes, especially young lava tubes, can be extremely colorful. And the lava freezes in an amazing variety of forms: ripples, waves, lava falls, plunge pools, shelves, all kinds of things. Just fascinating. Kazumura Cave not only had colorful sections, it had sections that appeared to be silver-plated. In December of 2015, we headed north for a change to Iceland. Now, going to Iceland in the winter might not sound too smart, but if you want to visit glacier caves, that's when you have to go. They melt during the summer. Naturally formed ice is, from the geologic point of view, a mineral. It's naturally occurring. It has a fixed chemical formula, H2O. It has crystal form, has always set physical characteristics. It's a mineral. So large masses of natural ice are, from the geologic point of view, bodies of rock. And caves do form in these bodies of somewhat cold rock, but not by chemical dissolution of the rock, but by melting of the ice bedrock. So imagine walking up to the stone walls of a cave and peering into the rock and seeing myriad sparkly bubbles. It was magical. And this is what it looks like when you're underneath a creeping glacier slowly sliding down the valley. Well, in 2017, we went to the Carlsbad area to visit caves developed in gypsum, plus the big caverns that are created by sulfuric acid speleogenesis, which makes them highly unusual. And we even visited one constructed cave, where the cave was a space enclosed by the deposition of rock rather than the destruction of rock, a cave in travertine at Sitting Bull Falls. So we got 3 weird types of caves in one trip. And we still have caves in marble to visit, and wave-eroded coastal caves to visit, and maybe talus caves to visit. It ain't over yet, folks. So how does all of this sum up? To the younger members of my audience, if there are any, I hope there are, I encourage you to become professional speleologists or world-renowned cave explorers. But not everybody can do that for a lot of different reasons. Not everybody can do that. And it really isn't necessary. You can still see some of the world's greatest caves, some of the world's most exotic caves, and some of the world's most beautiful caves, and be nothing more than an old-time spelunker. All it takes is perseverance and a little help from your friends. And I thank you for your time and attention. can take questions if there's any questions. I thought I explained everything. Why would there be questions? But okay, if you've got questions.
Rick,
Yeah.
the conglomerate cave, so the grains were limestone. What was the matrix?
The matrix was a reddish siltstone. And don't know what the cement was. The cement was probably calcareous, but I don't really know that. Just a second, I can get there in a minute. Yeah, the matrix is sort of a brick red siltstone. Anybody else?
Favorite cave and which one would you like to go back to?
Oh, Chicky Bull. Chicky Bull, favorite cave, like to go back to. Yeah, of course, who wouldn't like to go back to Lechuguilla? Who wouldn't like to get back in with the giant crystals at Mina Naika? I have been recently informed that the mine is shutting down or has shut down. And I didn't tell you that that cave with the giant crystals was below the water table. And they can mine down there only by running the pumps 24/7, 365. That cave had probably been full of water until about 15 years before its discovery in 2000, but they're lowering the water table to be able to mine there. If they shut the mine down, they'll shut the pumps down, and the water table will rise back up, and that cave will be flooded again. If that has already happened, and I've told it has, well, I feel doubly privileged for the opportunity to see them.
But what were they mining?
It is zinc, lead, and copper, but it probably started out, as most of these mines did, as a silver mine. Silver mineralization is sort of low temperature mineralization, and you get that in the upper parts of the mine, and as you go down deeper and deeper and the mine gets hotter and hotter, you get less and less silver mineralization. So I think they were after metallic sulfides at the depth that they were currently mining. I ought to know, but that's long enough ago I don't remember. Yes?
Where are you going to go next?
Beg your pardon?
Where are you going to go next?
Well, looking for a nice marble cave.
One of your slides was labeled graffiti enhanced cave, and I'm wondering how graffiti enhances a cave.
Well, that was a satirical remark, meant to be satirical. I certainly do not approve of that form of enhancing a cave, but as we all know, it happens. Yeah.
Where's that formation that you'll lassoed out the cave now?
When my parents moved to Nashville, mother or dad, one of them put their foot down and said, "That's not coming with us." I don't know where it went. Anybody else? All righty, thank you again. Appreciate it.